I got it.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started probably in another minute or two. We are recording this, so if you don't want your camera on, no problem. Okay, we might as well get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicole. I am the Education Manager for the Eastern Sierra Interpretive Association. Our mission at ESIA is to provide high quality interpretive products, exhibits, and programs. So a big thank you to you who were able to donate or became a member to help us keep on creating these awesome programs, just like the one we're having today. Today we're viewing the film Legacy. Legacy was produced by the U.S. Forest Service in association sort of with ESIA. And this is a really good example of how ESIA works with our federal agency partners to share interpretation and education. It was written and directed by Joe Flannery, who has joined us here today. He's the Public Affairs Officer for the Tahoe National Forest. He has joined us for the viewing to discuss the process of bringing this film to share with all of us, and we'll be taking some questions at the end. So I'm going to hand it over to Joe. We are going to maybe do this a little differently in terms of we're going to take the YouTube link and put it in the chat in case you want to view that on your own. It might come in a little choppy otherwise if you're viewing it with us. We will still be viewing it with Joe, but we can reconvene like 20 to 25 minutes after we start. That way, if you want to view it on your own and have it be kind of the quality it's meant to be viewed in, that's totally fine. So Joe?
Well, cool. Well, hey, thanks for joining me here in a virtual environment. We've done a few of these virtual screenings of Legacy, and so this is a film about not just about the Chinese railroad workers' contribution to building the transcontinental railroad, and thus really, the infrastructure of the country, especially here in the West. It's also about the people who were retelling that story real recently. We had the centennial celebration of the Transcontinental Railroad's completion a couple years ago in 2019. And so there was kind of a big push by some of the groups that you'll see in this film to retell that story. How I personally became involved in this story, as Nicole said, I'm the Public Affairs Officer for the Tahoe National Forest. I've worked with the Tahoe National Forest for a decade, and I started out actually building trails. I was a trail program manager and a wilderness manager. And we were rebuilding a section of the Pacific Crest Trail up on Donner Summit, probably like 2012-ish or so. And for those of you who've done trail work, you know how slow and arduous it can be. And we were kind of grabbing these big granite blocks, and we were, spending all day to push them in shape and try and roll them into our trail to kind of build these check steps. And every once in a while, we were coming across rocks, these big granite blocks that had obviously drill marks in them and had blast scars on them. And we were harvesting rocks from this kind of pile that looked unnatural, and it became pretty obvious to us that we were using someone else's discarded rock quarry. So someone's leftover rocks that they hadn't used, we were using. So we asked our cultural program manager, hey, whose rocks are these? And she explained to us and took us right around the corner and showed us this absolute beautiful rock wall that was built by Chinese railroad workers over 150 years ago. And for me at the time, as a trail builder and a kind of a wannabe mover of rocks, shaper of rocks, I was absolutely blown away by just the magnitude and the scale of what had been accomplished, 150 years before me with hand tools and, crude dynamite. And that kind of stuck with me for a number of years. Flash forward to about 2 years ago, and the Tahoe National Forest, I'm now the Public Affairs Officer of the Tahoe National Forest. And at that time, we were hosting our second, we called it the Return to Gold Mountain Tour. And it's a tour that we jointly host with a bunch of organizations like the 1882 Foundation, the Chinese Historical Society of America, and some other organizations that you're going to see in the film. Part of this tour is we bring out educators and other folks to teach them about the Chinese contribution to the railroad and those cultural sites that are right there on Donner Summit. And the neat part is we sometimes get on a couple of the tours, we've had actual direct descendants of some of the railroad workers themselves that have come out on this tour. Through that tour and helping to organize and host it, I got to meet a bunch of the people in the film, and I got to see how much of their lives they had dedicated to the retelling of the story. As you'll see, the story wasn't always told that accurately about the contribution that these folks had to our country. And I think the combination of both, that early experience, the kind of awe and magnitude and really the beauty of the rock work, I think the film, we tried our best to show the magnitude. We're flying drones in railroad tunnels and we tried our best, but the actual magnitude, standing there on purpose, standing there in person, in the mountain light and all that, combined with what I saw as very inspirational folks really doing their best to retell that story. That's what inspired the film. So the film was actually quite easy to make. We just kind of put the cameras up and got them on passionate people. It debuted at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in 2020. He got into a bunch of film festivals right after that. And then, of course, a pandemic hit and all the film festivals got canceled. So we're doing this. We're spreading the word virtually. It is on YouTube. It's been hosted virtually by a number of different organizations. And so we hope you enjoy it. I'm going to share my screen. I'll take me a moment here. And we're going to play it here. And just like Nicole mentioned, if you want to as well, you could just turn me off, shut me up, grab the YouTube link, and watch it on YouTube. It might stream a little better directly to your device. And then when I'm finished, I'll wait a moment for the YouTube folks to turn off, and we will do any kind of questions. We could talk about anything you guys want. Railroads, filming, Tahoe National Forest, whatever you want. So let's see if I can do this, and I'm going to start it.
In 2010, my father passed away, and some family and business took me to China. I'm firstborn American Chinese on my dad's side of the family, and my wife and I both moved there to Hong Kong and Beijing, where we lived for almost 5 years. We really enjoyed our time, but it was time to move on. And so we moved back to Lake Tahoe. Pretty much 90% of my work is spent in the mountains here. It's interesting, I moved here from China to pursue work, and being back here on Donner Summit, where I've climbed and knew a little bit about the history, whether it be the Donner Party or how the railroads were built by the Chinese here. And I'm like, oh, I'm not the first person to move here from China and try to make a living and a better life for myself.
In the years after the Civil War, the Transcontinental Railroad was nearing completion. As the railroad was making progress, there was one really formidable barrier, and that was the 7,000-foot summit of the Sierra Nevada mountains. To build a railroad across these mountains, the Central Pacific turned to an unlikely workforce, the Chinese.
The builders of the railroad realized they didn't have enough workers to do the thing. So they said, well, let's try the Chinese who are here mining or doing other things like this. And they started the crew right here in Auburn. They realized that the Chinese were such a great workforce that they decided to start recruiting Chinese to the point where you almost had up to, we don't know the exact numbers, but there could be 12 to 20,000 workers coming and made up 80 to 90% of the Central Pacific Railroad's workforce.
The location chosen to cross these mountains was Donner Pass on the present-day Tahoe National Forest.
There are 3 sites within the boundaries of the Tahoe National Forest related to the construction of the Central Pacific Railroad. These sites are all that remain and exemplify the incredible effort that it took to blast the railroad through the Sierra Nevada mountains. China Wall was constructed by hand, block by block. It supported the original alignment of the Central Pacific Railroad. Summit Camp was a work camp. There were barracks, there were cookhouses, there were stables for horses. So it was definitely an area where there was a collection and a focus for work activities.
There were maybe 3,000 people at that camp that lived over there for over 2 years, building that tunnel in adjacent areas to the tunnel.
Construction of the Summit Tunnel was slow and laborious. Workers were only able to move 14 inches of rock a day. To blast through the granite, hand charges had to be set. Holes were drilled by hand using a drill and a sledgehammer. A charge was then set with black powder, and after the blast, a different crew would come in to remove the waste rock.
And it was through 2 of the worst snowstorms ever recorded in history. They were building this tunnel, which is 5 football fields long.
And I find that remarkable. That was 1866, 1867. Today it would be hard during summertime. To think about them doing that during the winter, I think is incredible.
This was the highest elevation tunnel ever built in the world at the time. They had to invent techniques to do this. And it was all done by hand. How could we do these things? It was really Chinese labor who changed America. It was an American project. It was designed, it was directed by Americans, built with American capital. But the hands, the feet, the labor, the sweat, the grunting, the pain, the death, the accomplishments were all Chinese oriented.
The story of the Summit Tunnel itself, that term should be as compelling or evocative to us as when we hear the words, the Trail of Tears, or the Underground Railroad, or the Oregon Trail, or Route 66. We need to tell that as part of our, and that's the collective our folklore.
In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is complete. Leland Stanford drove a gold spike into the last rail at Promontory Summit, Utah, and the nation cheered. The Transcontinental Railroad revolutionized trade. It united East and West. It opened up international markets from Asia all the way to Europe. And eventually it revolutionized the American economy, as well as the way that we travel. Here in my time, we have the internet that allows us to send email across the world or across the street in real time. These are analogous events, and they both changed how we live.
There's a chapter in American history that belongs to the Chinese, and that a lot of it has to do with the construction of the Transcontinental and how the Transcontinental Railroad transformed this country.
Following the completion of the railroad, this huge surplus Chinese workforce was no longer welcome. Pent-up discrimination and the introduction of more onerous laws and unfortunately common values that espoused hatred and prejudice caused many Chinese to return to China. It caused others to go off and do subtle work, but the drumbeat of discrimination and hatred towards Chinese people kept increasing, and that culminated in 1882 with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act.
So in 1882, Congress passed what might be called the first comprehensive immigration law, in which it excluded Chinese from immigrating to the United States, and then it prevented Chinese from becoming American citizens. It actually illustrates one of the tensions that occur throughout the American history from its beginning. But that tension has always been there. It's illustrated in the Chinese case that after we have built this railroad because we needed laborers, we bring in immigrants or people from another country. 14 years later, we then try to kick them all out.
Following the passage of the 1882 Act, the Chinese contribution to our country began to be forgotten or neglected, or maybe consciously excluded from our memory. By the early 20th century, not many people thought about this or even realized these things had happened. And in 1969, perhaps the biggest snub occurred at the centennial of the completion of the railroad.
A representative of the Historical Society was invited to be at that May 10th ceremony at Promontory. That individual was Bill Choi. So there was a lot of anticipation and a feeling that, aha, took 100 years, but we're finally going to get our just recognition. He gets to the ceremony, and then he's told, oh, we are sorry, Mr. Choi, but we have taken you off the program because the program just doesn't have enough time. But then he had to sit through the keynote speaker, who was then the Department of Transportation Secretary, John Volpe, who said, who else but Americans could drill 10 tunnels in mountains 30 feet deep in snow? Who else but Americans could chisel through miles of solid granite? The snub in 1969 inspired a number of people to try to make it right.
In 2011 and 2012, we got both the Senate and the House to agree to resolutions that talk about, we'll actually put into the official record then, the congressional record, the history of Chinese migration here, their contributions to the country, and the reactions which the United States had to them.
Another part of the effort was that at the appropriate milestone or celebrations, that our stories, the Chinese story, was covered, would be voiced.
The group's consensus was we couldn't just drop it. You had to form something that continued to tell the story.
Things began to change as the country neared the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony in 2019. This time, a lot of groups, including the U.S. Forest Service, the 1882 Foundation, the National Park Service, the Chinese Historic Society, and many other groups and individuals would work tirelessly to make sure that this time the story was told completely and accurately.
The U.S. Forest Service is proud to help tell this story. Working with these organizations, the U.S. Forest Service has jointly hosted the Return to Gold Mountain Tours. The Return to Gold Mountain Tour provides an opportunity for descendants of the Chinese railroad workers, educators, and members of the public to visit important Chinese cultural heritage sites within the boundary of the Tahoe National Forest.
So we are on a train from Reno to Sacramento as part of a historic tour. Shortly, I will be visiting both my paternal and maternal ancestral villages in the Pearl River Delta region in southern China. And as part of my preparation work, I started to talk to a great uncle, and then he revealed to me that I actually have ancestors that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. So in many ways, I feel like my homecoming has begun.
The Forest Service is looking at opportunities to outreach to the urban, suburban populations, people that we might not normally connect with out on National Forest System lands. One way that we did this is going to the San Francisco Chinese New Year Festival, having a booth, bringing Smokey Bear, talking to kids, parents, families, any member of the public, telling them about the Return to Gold Mountain Tour, opportunities to sign up, giving them information about our Explore APA Heritage website, and giving them a booklet so they can visit the sites on their own if they can't make the tour.
And that's contributed to the public interest in the public lands, because it's something that you don't normally think about Chinese and the forest or the outside.
The Chinese historical sites within the boundaries of the Tahoe National Forest are so important. Many people don't realize they're there. Many people don't realize that this is a way that they can get to our National Forest System land and do something besides what we might think of as a traditional recreational opportunity. Hiking, camping, skiing, fishing, that type of thing. You can also go learn about our history, and it's our nation's living history.
On the Tahoe National Forest and many other sites, there's a renewed interest in the cultural history and the other cultural sites connected with these great events. So now you could really see the momentum as this story began to spread thanks to these people's efforts. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad is a huge story, but thanks to the contribution of the Chinese workers originally and the renewed enthusiasm of the people wanting to perpetuate their memory, the Chinese story became the dominant narrative connected with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad.
We could not have asked for better media coverage of the 150th and the story of the Chinese. Everybody picked up on the themes that we felt were important.
One could argue that the culmination of all of these efforts was the 150th anniversary celebration at Promontory Summit, Utah. This time, the current Secretary of Transportation had something different to say.
Today, at the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike Ceremony, marking the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, is a day to commemorate the contribution of railroads and the contribution and sacrifices of the railroad workers, including approximately 12,000 or more Chinese laborers, who risked everything to make the Transcontinental Railroad a reality. Building from the west, the Central Pacific Railroad hired 15,000 workers, of which 12,000 or more were Chinese immigrants. These workers of Chinese ancestry blasted and chiseled their way through the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains, using manual hammer drills, pickaxes, and explosive. They dug 15 tunnels through pure, hard granite. An estimated 500 to 1,000 Chinese workers lost their lives. But the Chinese workers persevered and played a key role in building one of the greatest infrastructure projects in the world.
I think we could be very happy that the story of the Chinese contribution to the Transcontinental Railroad was finally told in all its glory.
But you know what is really heartening during the 1882 project was, as unknown as it was to so many people, how many surprised it was how welcoming people said, tell me more. Tell me more about this story. I want to know more details. I want it in our textbooks. I want it in our public records and so forth. That is encouraging.
And we had an elected official or an appointed official, the Secretary of Transportation, speak on behalf of the country acknowledging the contribution of Chinese workers. We couldn't have dreamt that in 1969.
That gives us hope for the creation or continuation of what it is that should be American, who are Americans, what that means, not just for my grandkids or to acknowledge the fact that my grandfather and great-grandfather, they were important in building this nation, but it's also for everyone else who is an American trying to become part of this American nation.
I'm so lucky that I get to even play here at all, and I hit the lottery that I've been able to make it a living working and playing in the places that I love. Those feelings and those opportunities wouldn't have been available if it wasn't for the people that came before me, like my father and the immigrants that originally came here from China as laborers to build our infrastructure, such as these railroads here in Donner Summit.
I think for me, I didn't really get a sense of the impact of my connection to this particular site until I walked through Summit Tunnel, and then seeing that maybe this particular granite that I'm touching right now could be the same granite that my great-great-grandfather had touched.
The original immigrants, they created a legacy of coming here to the United States to pursue a better life. And I'm proud to be a part of that legacy.
Awesome. We'll give everybody maybe like 2 minutes or so to catch up with us and rejoin us back here.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Looks like a few folks maybe had no audio.
Yeah, I think it worked better. I sent him the YouTube link.
Perfect. Yeah. It's tough to do the screen share stream.
Oh, okay. Well, we can get started. Sarah, did you have a question? No?
Sorry, I did. I'm sorry. I apologize for being late. I'm a teacher, so we just had a big town hall meeting with everything going on. I'm a fourth grade teacher, so I was wondering, is this legacy video available for us, for the fourth grade students to watch? Somewhere I was a little late, so I didn't hear where this movie has been shown, or if it is able to be shown in schools.
Yeah, Sarah, it's on YouTube. Tell you what, I'm gonna put my email in the link too, and I have no problem sending out. Forgive my typing and talking. Maybe I'll wait. Keep talking for a second. I have no problem sending a link to you if you want like a downloadable link to just have and show. Because yeah, please show it in fourth grade. I actually was in fourth grade, not very far from where this was filmed, and bless my teachers, but we in our state of California curriculum, but I didn't learn much about this history, and I grew up not too far away, so I would love to reverse that. I didn't learn about this till I was in my 20s. So yeah, I'll put my email down, and feel free to reach out if the YouTube link doesn't work. That's in the chat, and we can accommodate.
Wonderful. Anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask on chat or unmute themselves? Or oh, Melissa?
Yeah, we were wondering that when they were showing the scene for the train to go through the tunnels didn't seem like they were wide enough for a train to go through.
Yeah, great question. So they've actually the tunnels that we filmed, as railroads grew in size, the railroad has been realigned. It's now on the other side of what's called Schallenberger Ridge. I mean, it's when you walk through it, it's huge, right? But you're right, it's not quite. I think a train would fit through, but not to safety standards of today's railroad. So that section of rail line has been abandoned. Like I said, it's been rebuilt just on the other side of the ridge from there. Yeah, built for 1860. What was that?
I just said thank you very much.
It looks like we have a question here in the chat by Mark. Any idea how many miles of the original route is still used?
Of the original built route, kind of from the Sierra Nevada route, if you will, that's kind of from roughly Auburn up and over Donner Summit. I'm not sure. A lot of it is. There's some other pretty kind of harsh building areas. Forgive me for blanking on the names of them right now. There's two other pretty cool areas that were built by hand that are still in use. I can't think of it. So I'm not sure. One of the gentlemen there in the film, Phil Sexton, easy to look up. He works for the state of California in their parks department at the Railroad Museum, and so that'd be the person to ask that question. As far as exact mileage, I'm not exactly sure. One thing I did want to mention, you saw at the end there, we had the ECA logo. This was our second kind of educational film that we've made on the Tahoe, produced in-house, and in partnership with ECA. And so both of them have been at they've all been at film festivals. They both debuted down here in Nevada City at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. The other one's also on YouTube. It's a little more of a PSA piece about wildfire and forest health, and kind of what the Forest Service and our partners do to kind of create a more resilient landscape. It's also on YouTube. It's called Fire and Forest Health. If you same thing, type in Forest Service, Fire and Forest Health. That's the other film that we produced along with ECA. And so, yeah, like we mentioned in the beginning, the top of the hour here, that partnership, each of us on our own really probably can't accomplish as much as we all can together. So it's pretty cool that, this film has been, like I said, some of those organizations have really been showing it around the country and using it to start dialogue. And some of that dialogue is actually with the National Park Service right now. And there's kind of a movement to create that Summit Camp area as a national registered landmark, possibly national monument someday. And so again, all of us working together can do more than any of us alone.
Tim or Gail?
Yeah, there's a book written by Stephen Ambrose that has a lot of info. I can't remember the title, but it's a good read too. It's about the transcontinental railway.
Excellent.
Let's see, in the chat, anyone know the link to the Gold Mountain tour?
Yeah, I can speak to that real quick. So we were just, so we've done a Gold Mountain tour. The Return to Gold Mountain tour was in 2018 and 19. It was paused last fall, a couple months ago, due to the pandemic, and it's most likely going to be paused again this year. But I think that was Sarah that asked, and Sarah, yeah, the idea is we bring educators. It's I wouldn't say it's invitation only, but it's focused towards educators and railroad descendants themselves. So again, pop me an email. I'm optimistic we might have a tour in 2021, but I think we're going to end up doing something either virtual or whatnot. But back in business in 2022, and it's pretty cool. We take a bus all the way from Auburn, and we stop at a bunch of the sites along the way. We spend the night in Reno. We have a big dinner. You get to hear a bunch of cool stories, and then we all take the train back. And we're talking about we were actually filming on the tour, right? So you saw some of that footage. We were on the train, and that's where I kind of learned a lot of this that I've now forgotten immediately. But really cool people out there who, like I said earlier, have really dedicated their lives to getting this story out there. And really hats off to them. Some really cool people.
I had a comment. My husband's great-great-grandfather, actually, he's a descendant. My husband is, but he didn't work on the railroad. He actually sold tools and Levi's and anything that they needed. I know that he came out of Watsonville, but I'm not too sure what camp he actually was in during that time. But by proximity is probably in the same area. I remember doing a report on it back in college, but that was a long time ago, so I forgot the facts. But we still have his immigration papers. And then when he was all done and the railroad was all done, same thing, there was no need for him or his type. And so he went back to China, raised a family there. And a couple generations later, they came back here. My husband's born and raised here in Southern California. But it's kind of interesting to watch this because I was unaware of this film. So I can't wait to pass it on to like my mother-in-law to see how she likes it, or for my kids to see it too. So thank you.
That's excellent. I couldn't see who was speaking there, but so sorry, I don't know your name, but I would recommend you reach out. So both the 1882 Foundation and the Chinese Historical Society of America, they're both recording oral histories as kind of part of this big endeavor to kind of capture this story. If your husband has some family stories, there's no time like the present to try and get those into the record. There's a big effort right now to kind of reconstruct, who were these people? What was the daily life like for some of these folks who, came from certain provinces all the way out here? They worked. And so a lot of that is recorded only in oral histories. And so, yeah, possibly reach out to those organizations. They're collecting that right now. And they'd probably love to hear from your family and hear your family's stories.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? No? Not seeing any. Well, what are your thoughts, Jeff? Should we wrap it up or?
I just want to extend another thank you to Joe for joining us, being a part of this. And so it was great to be a part of the two first projects and plan to do many more. So thanks, Joe, for taking the time and so forth.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having us. Thank you to you, Nicole, as well. And again, emails in the chat. If anybody else, wants to do a screening or has any questions or anything, just let me know. I'll be glad to help.
Well, looks like we have one more question, Patricia.
Yes, I'm just curious. Is there some kind of trail or something that you can take on the old railroad bed, like through the Summit Tunnel? Is that open to the public or is that closed except by the tours?
Great question. So that is actually railroad property. So even though that line has been abandoned, that it's still owned by the railroad. And I always say railroad is kind of railroad rights and property rights. They're much like mining property rights. They were some of the first laws written about the West. Those laws were written before the states around them were generally created. And so because of that, theoretically, yeah, me as a government representative, I would say that you are trespassing if you were to walk on those. I will also say that in the summertime, probably hundreds of people walk on them every day. When we were in the tunnels filming, there was people passing through. I'm not sure, the railroad hasn't closed them, but they also don't enforce it. And so I'll leave my comments with that.
When did they reroute it? When did they stop using?
That is a great question. I should know the answer to that, and I do not. My guess it would be definitely pre-World War II, as we started to move big pieces of equipment across the country. So yeah, my guess is going to be probably right after, I don't know, I'll stop guessing there, but definitely before World War II as we move these gigantic, weapons around.
Oh, so they just needed to have more space. That's why they changed the route.
Yeah, the equipment that we were moving got bigger, and so our trains got bigger and everything else. So,
yeah. I have a research interest because I study bats, and I was thinking that tunnel would be an incredible hibernation site for bats. I don't know if anyone in the Forest Service has looked.
we were up there quite a bit. I didn't see any. There's a lot of people do come through there, but great question. I don't know if you could see it, but that one, we had the drone kind of fly down, that one, and you see the drone made a turn. And what that was is called the central shaft. And so as the railroad workers were, going 14 inches a day laterally, they realized it's going to take like 3 years to create the tunnel, the engineers did. So they did some calculations and they dug a tunnel straight down. It goes 75 feet straight down. And then they started building from the outside in. So they're actually building on, 4 different sides.
Oh.
And when they all met up, the engineers were only 6 inches off versus, over a quarter-mile run or so. And so that's what that tunnel is. So as you walk through the tunnels, if you choose to trespass, bring a powerful flashlight with you, because about halfway through, you can turn the flashlight up and there's this tunnel that goes straight above your head, up another, 75, 80 feet. And it is then capped off up top.
So they must have had a hoist there, because if they were digging from the inside, they must have had to raise the debris that very much like mining underground, you need it to get the rock out.
Yeah. And I mean, they were pretty much inventing dynamite on the site. They invented their own kind of strain. And so you can imagine that how you would put a blast in, be lowered back up with ropes and get behind other rocks. And I will say through this, you hear a lot of pictures or see pictures. We have the painting we showed in the film, and you hear a lot about this idea of Chinese railroad workers dangling in rope baskets and whatnot. I've heard mixed facts if that was true or not, or maybe it was true in small situations, but it's been exaggerated. So some of the historians that I encountered in making this film, it said some of that was exaggerated. What wasn't exaggerated was the use of dynamite to accompany the construction.
Oh, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Joe, so much for joining us. One more last call. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Joe. We really
appreciate it. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate you guys making time on a Thursday night here.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.